It's 10 here on ABC Newcastle and New South Wales. Thanks for having us on at your place today. Now, removing the bottlenecks on our roads, and our rail and port infrastructure has the potential to be a game changer for regional cities. And while the state government recently announced a major freight reform program, Regional Cities New South Wales is conducting its own independent research to identify local freight choke points. Councillor Matthew Dickerson is the chair of Regional Cities New South Wales, joins us to tell us why. Matthew, thanks for coming on. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Paul. I love it to see when the state government follows the lead put out by the regional cities, because we'd started this program already and been well down the path of this, and now they've followed suit, which is fantastic.
So do you trust them to do a good job? Can you step back now, or are you just as determined as always?
Well, we were doing a specific review around choke points. So one of the things that we identified, one of the great things about having 15 cities together in the room and talking about a variety of issues, is that so many things don't realise that there is a boundary, a local government boundary, and freight is one of those things, Paul. When you've got freight to go from A to B, that particular truck, that truck driver, they don't sit there and think, well, I'm now in ABC local government area, now I'm in DEF local government area. They just know they've got a road to go from A to B. One of the things we identified is that there are various choke points along the way, but it's hard for individual councils to go and approach the state government on those choke points for two reasons. One, sometimes those choke points might be over boundaries, and sometimes it's hard for a local government to get enough money for within their boundary, let alone worry about what might be happening along route. So we were successful last year in getting some funding from the state government to go out and do this independent research and to actually come back with this process. So the fact that you've now got the Minister for Transport announced this freight reform program, we think it's fantastic. That happened this year, in January this year. We'd already been well and truly down our planning path, and we've already got to the point where we've identified, our preliminary results have identified 102 freight pinch points across the network, across the road network, across New South Wales. We'll continue on with the program that we've been doing to get those more detailed and then be able to present those to the government. We think that'll help the government, obviously, as long as they continue on then to fix these pinch points.
Matthew, it'll be a month or so back, it was around the Christmas period, I got stuck behind probably, I don't know how many trucks it was in the end, but I just threw my hands in the air and thought, we're here for the long haul, there's no point getting upset about it. But I just thought that was bad luck, the 5 or 6 B doubles in front of me on a single lane highway. But you're saying that's more about poor management rather than bad luck?
Well, I think it's right. It might have been a bit of bad luck for you at the moment at that time, but I think in general you do see lots of these pinch points, and sometimes those pinch points are areas where you don't have overtaking lanes, which is obviously what you were stuck behind. Sometimes it might be where they've got a crossing over some railway lines and you might get stuck with railways, vehicles or trains going along that particular railway line, so then you're stuck there for a period of time. Sometimes it can be taking heavy vehicles through town centres where they've got to go very slow through those town centres, and a bypass could reduce that. Again, these results aren't the final results out, but we've estimated there's a cost for those pinch points of about $120 million per year in lost productivity for being able to move that transport from A to B. And there's a lot of transport that moves around the state. So if you start to look at, for example, the Infrastructure Australia, they said between 2011 and 2031, the domestic land freight task will grow by 80%. So we're seeing a lot of that happen already. We're seeing a lot more freight move around. So there's a fair amount of freight. And even when we look at by the year 2036, 618 million tonnes will be moved around our freight and ports network. So it's pretty important to be able to move it from A to B.
Do we rely too much on roads? Are we using rail and sea transport effectively in this country?
I think, this program, we've got the pinch point program, focuses on roads, mainly because that's where things seem to have moved to. My personal view is that we probably were using rail more effectively a few decades ago, but it comes down to probably consumer demand and the way organisations run with their just-in-time freight processes now. The rail network is a bit slower. So inland rail, when that finally gets completed, will be great for moving certain freight up and down the East Coast. But in general, I think you'll still have that freight on road, or some freight on road, because people need it urgently. They need it today. They need it yesterday. So maybe we do rely too much on the road network, but if we're going to go down that path, we need to make sure we're putting the appropriate amount of money into maintaining that network.
Matthew, I appreciate your input today. Thanks so much for coming on.
My pleasure, Paul.
There's Councillor Matthew Dickerson, the Chair of the Regional Cities Program in New South Wales. Let us know if you've got any perspective on that as well. 0487 99 1233. John has phoned through, actually, has got an observation he'd like to make. G'day, John. Thanks so much for coming on today. What's your point?
Thank you. Your guest seems only to be talking about freight on the roads,
Yes.
from what I could pick up.
Yeah, that was the point of that research program, was around road pinch points specifically.
Well, it's a very narrow research program because there's enormous opportunities for freight on the rail, and if that's done properly, it'll take freight off the roads. So that's an overarching matter that should be looked at. Our group in Newcastle has been looking at this issue since the port first wanted to put a container terminal in 2010.
Yes.
And there are a number of issues about containers on trains. The first being that containers need to be stacked double height, and at the moment we haven't got the bridge and tunnel clearances for that, so that's a very big issue that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, that would be a problem at pretty much every tunnel and every bridge across the railway line, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but it's not an insurmountable problem, and we've actually done an analysis to get here from Newcastle Port out to the main rail line on the other side of the dividing range. There are a very precise number of them that can be identified, but there's an enormous pinch point in what's called the Ardglen Tunnel, which was built back in the 1880s. And that's an enormous problem. That's just outside Murrurundi. I don't know whether you've ever been to Tamworth on the train, but coming and going through the Murrurundi, through the Ardglen Tunnel is an enormous problem. That needs to be replaced. And that
would impact on all transport to Brisbane as well, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, once you get out to that line, you've got direct access not only to Brisbane but to Melbourne and to Darwin and to Adelaide and to Perth, and there are enormous opportunities. Lots of the freight rail being built allows for double stacking. Some of the stuff here needs to be upgraded, and I'm terrified to think that the new bridge that they're going to put out over the Hexham Swamp won't be high enough, for instance. So it starts at the planning.
Yep, okay, more consideration of rail. John, good on you. Thank you for your observations today. If you want to tell us anything, to 0487 99 1233 is how you can reach me.